The information provided on this podcast is for general informational purposes only and is not intended as a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your qualified health provider with any questions you may have. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you have heard on this podcast. Reliance on any information provided here is solely at your own risk.
Welcome. This is Birth, Baby. Your hosts are Ciarra Morgan and Samantha Kelly. Ciarra is a birth doula, hypnobirthing educator, and pediatric sleep consultant.
Samantha is a birth doula, childbirth educator, and lactation counselor. Join us as we guide you through your options for your pregnancy, birth, and postpartum journey. Thank you to our listeners for your continued support. If you enjoy our content, please be sure to like, follow, rate, and review wherever you listen to podcasts. This helps us gain visibility to other people that could benefit from listening in. Hello, everyone. Today is just a Ciarra and Sam episode to talk to you about all of the options for after you have your kiddo and you gotta find childcare. So this is a stressful thing that a lot of our clients talk to us about.
Yeah, so stressful. And even us at like this point in our lives with older kids, this is still something that we get to navigate. So it doesn't really ever go away, but it is a very different thing at the beginning when you have a fresh new baby versus when they're a little bit older and have, more ability to talk and maybe not like lick the floor all the time.
Right. Yeah, it's so hard because when your kids can't talk and they can't communicate with you if anything's wrong when they're there or whatever, like that adds that whole other layer of unknown. And, prior to ever having kids, I was a nanny. So I was a nanny at 19. They had 3 kids. They had twins while I worked for them. And I was there the day the twins got home from the hospital. I was there like 12 hours a day with those 5 kids. And then they were pregnant with number 6 when I got pregnant with my daughter. So I really was with that family and got to kind of see all of that realm. But I nannied for quite a few families over the course of a few years. And it's hard. It has to be the perfect fit, And I personally never had to use a childcare facility. I kind of did like a family thing with my kids to work around schedules. But some people need to find a childcare facility too, or a nanny share, all these things. So what was your experience with that?
Yeah. So I was actually a nanny for almost 10 years off and on in different settings. And so I have done a lot of that stuff. And then I also worked for a agency that it was really cool. It was focused on pairing up families, like almost like a dating service for families who were looking for a nanny share. So we would match families together who were looking for a nanny share, which is something we're going to talk about in a minute here, what that is. And then we would kind of match them with a nanny. So I got to be kind of on the other side of it, of like the hiring of the nannies and the vetting of the nannies. So that's been pretty cool. And currently I run one of the larger groups in the Austin area for nannies and nanny shares and daycare, home daycare facilities and that sort of stuff. So I'm still kind of got my toes in the water in that whole world. But then for my own kids, I kind of did a mixture of things. I had a lot of family care because I was nannying when they were itty bitty. They stayed with me quite a bit. And then when I started in the doula world, I used a little bit of family care as well as a like a daycare Mother's Day out sort of facility. And it was a journey figuring out like what that looks like. And it was kind of scary, as a mom who never really had to do that before. So
you're like, we're used to people trusting us to take care of their kids, not having to trust someone to take care of ours. Exactly. I felt like that when I was starting my son at one of those little church kind of preschools where it's just for a few hours, twice a week or whatever when you start. But even that was really nerve-wracking to make sure you find the right place. So let's chat a little bit about There are a few options. So either you have some sort of daycare, which some people as early as 6 weeks put their baby into a daycare. And you could drop your kids off as early as like 7 a.m. at some of these and pick them up as late as 6 p.m. at some of these. And some of them require that you drop your kid off at a certain time. Some of them have kind of flexible hours on drop off and pick up. And then we have nannies, which could be a solo nanny just for your family, or a nanny share, which I see a lot in the Austin area. Nanny share could be where someone does, the nanny works for this family Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and the nanny works for the other family Tuesday, Thursday, let's say. Or it could be, let's say both of you only have one kiddo. You guys share a nanny and you switch between houses or whatever, rotate. And the person takes care of both families' kids at the same time. And then we have family caregivers, which is what I was blessed enough to do. But it's someone in your family being able to care for your kiddos. My stepdad, we call him a stay-at-home grandpa, and he got to take care of my son starting around 6 weeks old. And he had never had a baby of his own. So that was quite the wild ride for him, feeding breast milk bottles and dealing with all of my pump stuff and bringing that to and from his house. So that was kind of fun too. So I think probably the most stressful one for people, usually, from what I hear, is finding a daycare facility. So can you kind of talk to us of what someone should be looking for when they're starting to, look at facilities that they could bring their child to?
Yeah, definitely. So I think some of the important things when we're talking about like daycare is thinking about like the safety aspect, right? So we want to have we want to talk about like the ratios of how many teachers are there per per child, and there's state dictated guidelines for for ratios, where it depends on like the age of each child, but there's state dictated guidelines. But then some facilities choose to go above and beyond that. So whereas maybe the state says there could be one teacher for every 4 babies, maybe they say actually that doesn't feel right because 4 babies for one teacher is a lot. So we're going to actually do 3 teachers or 3 babies for every one teacher. And that just kind of evens it up a little bit. So thinking about what that looks like, talking to the facilities, obviously talking about like, hey, where, what are the safety guidelines in place here? What are the, when somebody's sick, what does that look like? When a child gets hurt, what does that look like? Are there, cameras? Some places have cameras set up so you can like actually like check in and look at your child's classroom throughout the day. And some people really enjoy that. Or some do more of like we have, even for our kids' school, we have something called Class Dojo where the teachers will send pictures, and some of the daycares can use things like that, which is really awesome for those check-ins. So asking about some of those things. And then there's also some intricacies within the daycare systems too, of there's like a home daycare versus a public daycare. And some home daycares are really awesome options because it is more of a like home-based caregiver plan. And, kids get to be somewhere where there's not as many, maybe it doesn't feel like they're going to school all the time. They get a little bit more individualized care. But the downside to that is some of those are not licensed daycare programs. Some of them are operating outside of ratios. Maybe they haven't gotten inspections and things like that. So really looking into that, seeing if they are a licensed program. Also talking through, if this is a home daycare program, who else is going to be in the house when the children are there? Those sorts of things are really, really, really important.
Security is also a big issue because at some of these daycare facilities, not only do they have cameras and stuff in there, but like sometimes the parents only have a certain key card that can be used, or they have a certain code, and each family has their own code to be able to enter the doors. It's almost like Chuck E. Cheese. Like you got to make sure your kid matches your wristband or whatever when you leave, And so that can be really, comforting for some parents. I remember when I was a nanny, I would pick up the kids from their daycare and take them home because their parents needed care even after they had both. That was really a wild thing for them to have to deal with, getting me a card or whatever, a code to go in. And I had to be fully vetted by them on whether or not the place was going to let me in. They questioned me a lot because I was way too young to be having those 2 kids I was walking out with. But that gave them also so much peace of mind that their child was really pretty secure in there. There was like multiple doors you had to go through before you even got to an area that had children in it. So
Because the flip
security.
side of that is places that aren't taking those security measures seriously. And we
Mhm.
hear stories all the time of, hey, this parent just walked in to pick up their child and there was another child standing in the parking lot or
Yeah.
trying to cross the street, or they
Or
didn't know
someone
where
got to take home the wrong kid.
somebody took home the wrong kid. And then, even thinking through like the transportation, are they going to go on field trips? What does that look like as far as making sure there's enough adults to take care of those children and making sure kids are getting in and out of the cars safely? What does the car seat situation look like? Some daycares will like take kids on little mini field trips and not have car seats for the kids. Like, oh, they're 4 years old. They don't have to have a car seat. Well, oh my gosh. Yes,
Oh,
they
yes, they
do.
do. Yeah. Yeah, I think
So
that the security issue, there just isn't going to be as much of that at an in-home daycare, but doesn't mean it's bad, just something to consider.
yeah, absolutely. So I think when you're looking at all of those things, it's important to get reviews on both of those from other parents. If you're considering an in-home daycare, you can go look up their licensing on the state websites. If you are same with public daycare options, you can go look up their licensing and like their grade with the state and how well the state thinks they're doing. That can be really helpful. You can
Mhm.
also see reports that have been made against them. But
Mhm.
then also just talking to other parents in the community. Parent Facebook groups they can be a mixed bag, but when it comes to this stuff, I think they can be really helpful because you can see what conversations are being had. We have an issue happening right now in my little Facebook area where there's a daycare that was highly graded. It's like a chain. Everybody knows them, and for some reason the program is really, really struggling, and parents are talking about these really sad, not great things that are happening. And so many people are like, oh my gosh, I signed my child up for that because I've heard so many great things about the other ones, but then this one is being run by this person or this group or whatever.
And
And you wouldn't know that.
turnover.
Yeah.
Turnover is huge because
Mhm.
sometimes, like, it's hard for a kid. My child he'd never wanted to be dropped off at daycare or at his little preschool. And we would be in the line and he'd go, Mom, you could still turn around and go to grandpa's house. Like he just wanted to go to grandpa's house. He actually said, Drampa. I want to go to Drampa's house. And so that was really difficult because even though he liked his teacher, he still didn't want to go. And his teacher was one of my dear friends. So it's not like, I mean, I knew what he was walking into, but for him, he still didn't want to do it. And if there was ever a sub, even, it was really hard to drop him off. So you have to consider that's a lot of upheaval for these kids that are doing that. And another thing is food. Like some of them provide food and lunches where others you have to pack for. So just all of these things kind of looking into them. So anything else you wanted to say about daycares?
Yeah, I mean, I think other than that, really just going in, touring the facility, talking to other parents who have their children there. Ask if it's, a smaller facility, ask for references. That can be really helpful too. But do your due diligence. And then also I always recommend that people choose something that is closer to home or closer to your work. Don't be planning on driving way out into Timbuktu because you heard that this place was really great, but you're driving 45 minutes to and from. That is not going to be sustainable. You're going to hate it. Your kid's going to hate it. And it's going to cut into your time with your kid too.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. It's kind of a mixed bag. It's like, do you do the place that's closer to home so that you drop them off earlier and they don't have to do the drive every day, but then you're away from them for an hour and a half more or whatever if it's a 45-minute drive each day to work? Or do you have them in the car with you for that 45-minute drive each way and have somewhere closer to your work? That can be difficult. We actually have a family who just had their second kiddo, and the childcare facility is next to her work, but now she's home on postpartum leave. And she's like, oh my gosh, we're driving him 40 minutes to school each day.
Yeah.
And sometimes with traffic, it's way longer than that. And this is kind of a pain in the butt now that we're home postpartum with this other baby, but we don't want him to get out of his routine. So,
Yeah. It's tricky.
okay. So then we have nannies. What things should we consider when looking for a nanny?
Yeah. So we mentioned a little bit like nannies versus nanny shares. Nanny, like a private solo nanny, is someone who you hire. This is an individual. They're considered an employee of your family. and they are solely caring for your child. So, like, kind of the general duties of a nanny is they are almost stepping into like the mom role when you aren't home. So they're going to be taking care of your kid, helping with meals. Maybe some nannies might do some like light household duties, things like that. Like I know with some of my families, my job was solely just the child. And then with other families, it was kind of part of my contract that I did a little bit of things around the house for them. I helped with laundry and I would, like start dinner for them when they were on their way home, things like that. And that was part of that contract. And then there is the nanny share, which is, like Ciarra said, there's a couple of different ways that you can do this. Most commonly, when we're talking about nanny shares, we're talking about one nanny who is caring for multiple families' children. So there's different ways that you can set this up. You could do this where you're rotating houses, or sometimes there's a family that works from home and they don't want the kids at home, or vice versa. They do want the kids at home. And so they offer to host full time. And this could be, two families. It could be three families, depending on the nanny and how many kids there are involved. But when you're thinking about nanny shares, you kind of want to think about like, how old are the kids? Are we going to have a big gap? Or are there going to be like three babies that are all the same age? Because again, going back to ratios, that gets a little bit tricky. Two babies, okay, three babies, we're getting a little bit dicey. Anything above that for one solo nanny would be pretty tricky. But then if you have, two babies and a 4-year-old, great. Sounds like a great time to meet. Let's go. So thinking through kind of what those things look like. When we're talking about nannies, whether it's a solo nanny or a nanny share, cost is a big discussion. You are not paying daycare costs for a nanny. A nanny is a kind of luxury service that you are choosing for your family because you don't want to have your child in daycare for some reason or another. So when we're talking about nannies here in the Austin area, kind of average pricing is going to be anywhere from $25 to $40 an hour for a nanny. Sometimes even more depending on their experience and, additional certifications and what else they might be doing with your children. So cost is definitely a big thing. And then when you're thinking about that cost, it's important to also remember that nannies are considered household employees by the IRS. So that means that they have to be given a W-2. And that means that you are paying a portion of their taxes. So this is not a like 1099 contractor situation where you're paying her $25 an hour and then she's setting aside 30% of that $25 an hour because then she's not making very much, friends. This is something that you are setting aside. So when you're thinking about that, I personally always recommend that people work with a payroll system of some sort. There's a lot of options out there. Poppins Payroll is a great one. They do the whole thing for you. There's one called Penguin that is really great. Or you can also work with like care.com and they have a lot of payroll system as well.
Yeah, I think a lot of people don't think about this. Like some people just pay
Yeah.
people under the table for this, but because of the
Illegal.
requirements by a lot, like having them as an employee, like you're not really supposed to do any of that. You're not supposed to just give them a check and not ever claim it. It's illegal. Yeah. And, you have a requirement to treat them as an employee and there are employment rules on what you do. So you really do need to look into this.
Yeah, it gets really tricky. Paying them under the table might sound nice up front, but then they're not paying into Medicaid or all of those things, into Social Security. And then you also don't get to count, if you're paying somebody under the table, you can't count that on your tax return for childcare costs. Or if you do, your nanny is going to get dinged and you're going to get dinged. So it gets really, really tricky there. Definitely, I recommend talking to a good payroll system or a good CPA sort of person to kind of work through what that process is going to look like for your family.
It actually benefits the employer to do this because if you paid $50,000 this year for childcare to that employee, then that's, you have a tax write-off for some of that expense that you've done for childcare. So there is more, hoops to jump through, or there are more hoops to jump through. But at the end of the day, it's really protecting everyone.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And then I think the next part of nanny that's also incredibly important is thinking through the contract piece, because again, this is somebody that you are hiring to work for your family. And just like with doula care, we talk about contracts all the time, how important they are. It's super important with a nanny as well. Your contract is your place to decide, to really outline what the nanny's duties are, what your responsibilities to the nanny are, and everything in between, talking about what you would do in this situation, what she would do in that situation, and really exploring all of that together, laying it all out so that there's no room for, oh, well, I thought this or I thought that, because that's where things get really tricky. That's where nannies get burnt out. Families get burned by nannies who aren't doing what they expected. So I think that's a really, really important piece. There's lots of places you can go online to kind of get a sample contract and build from there. But I highly recommend working with the contract. And also, as part of that, too, when we're talking about like paperwork and safety and all those different things, the safety piece is so important with nannies. There are so many amazing people out there who just love taking care of kids. I know that I loved it when I was nannying full time.
They were like my kids before I had kids.
Absolutely. I still am friends with all of my nanny families. I see their kids
My
growing.
kids follow me on Instagram. How wild is that? It's so weird.
I know they're like taller than me now. I'm like, y'all stop. I
Yeah.
love it. We become a part of the family. It's
Yeah.
huge. But as you know, for every person like Ciarra and I who absolutely adored that, there's going to be somebody out there who is in it for the job or in it for not the right reasons and maybe just isn't well qualified to do it. So it is so incredibly important to be doing background checks on your nannies, full criminal background check. This is something you can get online. A full motor vehicle check, especially if you're going to have this nanny transporting your kids. Like when I nannied, I took the kids everywhere. We went to the
Me too.
library. We did all the things. We went to like the water, splash pad places. We did all of those things. I took the kids to school when they got old enough, but I would never have felt comfortable doing that if my family didn't trust me to do that. So thinking about motor vehicle checks. And then also when you're thinking about motor vehicle checks, think about how is the nanny transporting the kids? Are you giving her a car? Are you installing car seats in her car? What is that process looking like? So that's another little thing to think through. So background, motor vehicle, and then references are also so important, and multiple references. We like professional references and personal references. Call all of them, have a good conversation with them. Unfortunately, being in that group, in the moderator of this Facebook group, I see a lot of stories of people who are getting burned because they did not call references, or they called one reference and it just so happened to be her best friend who was pretending to be a parent that she
Exactly.
worked for previously or something like that. So multiple references is really, really important. And then, really just finding someone who can present themselves professionally, because this is a profession.
Yeah, and I think that people don't realize that this is a pretty competitive market, like, especially in
Absolutely.
the big cities like Austin. These nannies are professional nannies. If you're finding somebody who doesn't care about a contract, doesn't care about whatever, they're probably not worth their salt, but there are a lot of them here in Austin, and they
Or
are
new.
used to having yeah, or newer, and they're used to having contracts. They're used to getting a certain amount of days off a year. They're used to having you give them vacation time. Also, if you
Yep.
decide to take your family on vacation for a month, that doesn't mean that you don't pay your nanny for that month. Like, you're required to
Guaranteed
give them a
hours.
certain number of hours per
Yeah.
week. And or maybe you have them travel with you if they're open to doing that, and you have to pay them for going with you. Or if you're going to go out of town and you want extra work from them and they're going to work overnight or something to take care of your kids, you have to pay them extra for those things. So it's a pretty competitive market out there, and the good nannies are going to require these things. And I think of people like new parents that aren't used to this think, who is this person trying to require all of these things of me? And like, it's a protection for both sides. So
It really is.
yeah.
It really is. I think the nanny world, in a lot of ways, is really similar to the doula world. Like
Hmm.
they do continuing education, they do a lot of these things to help themselves. And they like kind of have businesses for themselves, even if
Hmm.
they don't have like a whole LLC situation happening. But
Yeah.
there's a lot that goes into it, and I don't think people always realize that, because so many people do. Ciarra and I did for a while, where it was kind of just a gap in between.
Yeah. And then we have families who take care of your family, or like a good friend or family member that's taking care of your kids. And one of the things we didn't mention with nannies that you'll want to consider too is like, what are your boundaries and willingness to have your kids on screens or have your kids go to certain places or like movie ratings and all of these different items? Like, do you have certain things you want your kids to do every day? I think that this is
Mhm.
much harder. Like when you have a contract with a nanny, then they're upholding that contract and like you have all of these things in place. But when it's family, usually you don't have a contract. And if it's like a grandparent, maybe they're, setting your kid in front of the iPad and letting them have a little extra time more than you would be willing to have them do, or having the TV on just in the background. I'm totally fine with the TV being on in the background, but I know some people that are not.
Mhm.
Let's talk a little bit about kind of setting boundaries and expectations for family members.
Yeah, I think there's a big difference between somebody babysitting your child versus doing long-term caregiving for your child. So, and it's kind of like the same thing in the nanny world too. But it's like, when my mom babysits my kids, I don't care if they watch a movie while they eat dinner and while they, play, and they can sit on screens the whole time. I don't care because I'm out doing something or another. My kids can chill and give my mom an easy time. But if my child is with someone every single day or multiple days a week for, long-term caregiving, I don't necessarily want the expectation to be that we're going to have 6 hours of screen time every day, or that we're going to be doing these, we're going to get whatever snacks we want every single day. And I think that that's where it can get really blurred really, really quickly. So I think that setting boundaries with the family, setting expectations with whoever it is that's caring for your child, and having those really open conversations early on, like, hey, if you, when you're taking care of my child, I need you to treat my child like your child. Like, we are furthering their education, we are helping their minds grow. Miss Rachel's the bomb, but she can't be the primary caregiver in this situation. So having those conversations early, having them often, and sometimes it could be helpful to come up with some sort of a agreement, or maybe not necessarily a formal contract, but some sort of agreement on like, hey, this is kind of like what the expectations are. This is how often I can ask you to care for my child. Like I know with you right now, with your stepdad, you have the expectation that he will care for your son like 2 days out of the month, and he can just
At the
call
drop of a
him
hat.
at the
Yeah.
drop of a hat. Yeah, exactly. And that's kind of the agreement that you guys have come up with, whether it's in writing or not. Having those sorts of things in place too. So you're not like, well, mom's babysitting my, watching my kids while I work every day, but then also calling, for all of these other things too. Or I'm staying out later and later because it's my mom and she's fine. She doesn't care. So you want to make sure
Right.
you're protecting both parties in those conversations. And then, making sure your child is getting everything that they want to.
Yeah, I think that was something that was really hard for me because when my son was younger, before he was in kindergarten, my stepdad helped me with him a lot. Like he would
Yeah.
even take him during the days that he didn't have school. He would have him for 4 hours a day, even when I wasn't like on call, just so I could get some meetings done and things like that. And they also just loved spending time together, and it was mixing it up and fun for them. But then I would feel like I would never ask them for date nights or anything like that. They would
Yeah.
say they wanted to, or like, hey, can we have him for have the kids for the afternoon or whatever? And great. But I would never ask extra of them. And we kind of have joked with my parents, like, you're around my kids too much. You don't get to treat them like grandkids. You have to kind of treat them like, you know, other kids because you see them too much to be doing only grandma and grandpa fun stuff all the time, like, the candy and all of that. And they're pretty good about that. Every once in a while there's something, but you got to pick and choose your battles because I don't pay them. Like they don't ask me for payment.
Right.
I do little things like buy them dinner but it's never anything official. So
Yeah.
that is something that you have to consider, and you need to find somebody else probably for the date nights if you're relying on that family member for work.
Yeah. Let's talk for a minute about kind of some of the common challenges, maybe. Like, I think the unique challenges that we would come with using family as caregivers, and kind of how we can navigate what that looks like. I think the thing that I hear most commonly is just different parenting styles when it comes to, like, I'm asking my mom to treat my child as her child, but she parents way differently than me. And she's my mom. So me telling her, comes with a little bit of baggage. Like, no, I don't want you to do it that way. I want you to do it this way. Comes with a little bit of baggage because it's a parent, it's an authority figure in my own life. So I think that can also be really, really tricky to navigate. And definitely can come with some challenges along the way. We hear this a lot.
Yeah. Yes to all of that.
Yeah.
I don't even know that I have anything to add to that. It is just, it can be really tricky, and you risk ruining relationships in the process if all of this isn't kind of handled properly.
Yeah. I think this is why you really have to be extra careful. Like we talk about, going on tours of daycare facilities, doing background checks and motor vehicle checks when we're talking about nannies. And when we're talking about family caregivers, I think being really picky about who that family caregiver is and what the foundation of trust is with that
making
person.
Sure they have the capacity to do what they've signed up for. Like some people sign up for something because they want to help, but really that's not sustainable for them. Yeah. And if they're sick, are they just like really easy to quick cancel because they're sick, or they just don't feel perfect? Are they going to take care of your kiddo when they're sick? That's something that's difficult with nannies too. I find that people expect their nanny to take care of their kid when they're sick, but they wouldn't send them to daycare.
Do the daycare. Yeah.
If they were sick. And so that's another thing. Like if your kid has a fever, you shouldn't require that your nanny come. You could give them the option. And you would still supposed to be paying them for that day that your child's sick because they're an employee and you canceled on them, kind of like you don't get money back from the daycare for the day that you don't get to send your kid because they're sick.
Right. Right. Yeah. It gets to be so tricky. I think just really navigating it with a lot of open conversations, a lot of trust, and really laying it all out, having the conversation, say the tough thing, say the hard thing, make sure that you both fully know what you're signing up for before you put all of your eggs in that basket, especially because
better on the front end
as heck right now. We don't want to waste those eggs.
Better on the front end and have it not work than have a blow up or a really bad situation that also puts you in jeopardy at your job because your childcare is falling through.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And when it comes to family, losing those relationships, we don't want to do that.
Yeah, that's rough. All right. Well, I think that's it. If you guys have any questions about this kind of stuff, we are so happy to answer follow-up questions. Y'all can email us at birthbabypodcast@gmail.com. And we would love to hear from you too on any other show ideas you have or things that you want us to talk about, topics you want to hear about. So we will see you next time.
Thank you for joining us on Birth Baby. Thanks again to Longing for Orpheus for our music. You can look him up on Spotify. Remember to leave a review, share, and follow wherever you get your podcasts. See you next week.